Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias.
Hello everybody, Tobias here. I know this is a second week in a row that you're not seeing Skip DeSheau on Fun Night Friday. Well, you saw him a little bit last week, but not so much this week. This is also November 11th, which is Veterans Day, and well, Veterans Day, as far as I'm concerned, is going to trump Fun Night Friday. So we will return to Fun Night Friday next week, but this week it's going to be on a little bit more of a serious note. Don't worry, I will be showing some knives, and these will be knives that I think somehow tie in to today, which is Veterans Day. In other countries, it's also known as Remembrance Day and also Armistice Day, and it's because at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month in the year 1918, the Great War came to an end. World War I, there was a ceasefire on the Western Front at that time, and it was said to be the war to end all wars. We know that part kind of fell short because it basically was probably directly related to the reason why World War II occurred, and we've had so many other wars since then. So, but the purpose in the United States for November 11th these days is to celebrate veterans, the veterans of the U.S. military who gave their time and served their country. It is a little bit different than Memorial Day, where we celebrate those who gave all so that we could have our freedom. And that's in May. Usually the last Monday in May is Memorial Day, but November 11th is Veterans Day. Some places will move it to Monday, but for the most part, the national holiday is November 11th. In any case, there's something else that happens on Veterans Day, or that you should be reminded of on Veterans Day, and that is that the people, especially those who fought and served in wars, carry that war with them the rest of their life. I know my father definitely did. He had nightmares his entire life from World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam. So he served in 3, and he carried the weight of those wars with him his entire life. And it is a enormous burden on the veterans in this country. And one of the things you will hear these days is people will say the phrase 22 a day, and they're referring to every day in this country, 22 U.S. military veterans commit suicide. And that's directly related to, in some way, to the burden they're carrying of having to fight a war. 22 a day. It's a pretty big number when you think about it. When you think about it, imagine walking down your street and seeing 22 people on that street are no longer there. The thing is that number is not accurate. The number now is up to 24 or 25 a day. So the number is actually trending in the wrong direction. There are actually more than 22 people, 22 U.S. servicemen who served this country, military servicemen who served this country, more than 22 a day, are committing suicide because of inadequate health care, inadequate treatment for the PTSD, so on and so forth. So while you're thinking about Veterans Day, while you're enjoying Veterans Day, consider that also. And consider doing something for the veterans out there, especially, I don't care which organization you want to support or anything, but think about supporting a veterans organization, or if the old thing of if you see a vet, thank the vet. let them know that you're thinking of them. And when you say it with sincerity, because a lot of them hear it, but the sincerity just isn't there. In any case, I did say there's going to be some knives, and I've already been rambling on now for over 5 minutes. And this is a knife program, so let me get on to the knives. And while I don't have a U.S. military knife from the Great War, I do have one that was used by the British. This came from Slick Slicers, actually. He gave it to me because he felt it didn't fit into his collection, and he thought I would appreciate it more, and I really do appreciate it more. Now, this is probably made after World War One, but it is the same pattern. This is the 1907 pattern bayonet used with the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle, commonly referred to as the SMLE, and it's scabbard, and you can see it's a pretty large bayonet. A sword bayonet is what they would have called it. And the United States did have a bayonet similar to this for the M1903 Springfield rifle. That was known as the M1905 bayonet, I believe. But this was the SMLE bayonet used in World War One in the trench fighting. Now, like I said, this one was probably made afterwards because the British were still using the SMLE at the beginning of World War II. The Australians used it all the way through World War II, so did the New Zealanders. India was still using the SMLE, or a pattern of Enfield rifle very similar to the SMLE and this bayonet right up into the, I believe, the 1960s. So that's the one I have. I'll make sure I get it back into the sheath the right way. Another knife I have, and I've shown this one recently. This is a reproduction, but it shows you just how brutal the fighting was in World War One. And this is a Robbins Dudley push dagger. This was something that was made for going on a trench raid and stuff, and it was designed specifically for punching through the greatcoats and killing people without mercy, really. Going for the neck, going for the kidneys, and so on and so forth, taking out sentries and stuff. And these also found their way all the way into World War II also. Like I said, this is just a reproduction, but you can see the kind of weapons that were being used in the trenches of World War I, and just how brutal that war could have been. And that's where the term shell shock came from and everything else. There was madness all around, and typically in World War One, the soldiers who would go crazy from the shell shock or anything like that, they were often just considered cowards, and often, instead of being treated for what, for their mental problems, quite often they ended up being shot in front of a firing squad for being cowards. Because they just could not take the shelling. So imagine that. And then the ones who managed to get home, how torn up they must have been. And so, yeah, there was suicides after that war, and a lot of broken men coming back from that war all around. Now, this is a modern day reproduction of the one for the Springfield rifle. And accuracy is really kind of limited. What they really did get right on it is the length of the blade, which is approximately 16 inches. Now the SMLE sword bayonet, that was 17 inches. And typically that's the way the bayonets were during during World War I. They were extremely long, and they made it into the early days of World War II, but they quickly ended up getting cut down. Now this is actually patterned after the M1942 bayonet, which was the replacement bayonet for the M1905 bayonet. And actually a lot of people say no, this is still an M1905 bayonet, The only thing is that the collectors refer to it as a 1942, or they will refer to it as a 1905 42. The difference being it will have a plastic handle as opposed to a wood handle. That's the main difference between the ones that were made at the beginning of World War II and the ones that were legacy bayonets from World War I. But like I said, this is just a replica, and it's not the world's greatest replica. And I know that because while I do not have, well, I'll show you why. This is the M1 bayonet. That is actually the classification given to it, and it was used with the M1 Garand rifle. Now, originally, this bayonet was just like the one I showed you. It was 16 inches long in the blade, but in 1942, the U.S. Army, basically said that bayonet's too long. It's screwing with the rifle accuracy and all sorts of other things, and they requested, and as if you can see here, I think I can get it to focus maybe. See the date, 1942. This is by Union Cutlery. You see the little bomb going on there. But what they did was they said, all right, well, we're going to make 10-inch long bayonets now. And so all the manufacturers started making 10-inch long bayonets. Obviously they had a bunch of blades that were 16 inches long. And if you notice, the fuller on this blade runs all the way through the tip of the blade. And that's because what they did was they took the 16-inch long blades and they cut them off, reground the tip, and turned them into 10-inch long bayonets. That's so if you see one that's from 1942 or earlier, even earlier ones from World War I, all the bayonets were just being recalled back, and they were cutting them down to a 10-inch bayonet. Now, interesting enough, the United States Marines were facing an enemy in the Pacific who had a bayonet already longer than their 16-inch long bayonet, and on top of that, the Japanese rifle was longer than the M1, and it was also longer than the M1903 rifle. The M1903 rifle is a rifle that the Marines actually entered the war with. They did not get the M1s until a little bit later. So a lot of the Marines pretty much kept their long bayonets, and they kept them throughout World War II in the Pacific, simply because they wanted something to counter the Japanese bayonet. But what was happening, especially in Europe, was they were getting their blades cut down, and they ended up being a 10-inch bayonet. And like I said, this one was originally would have been an M1905 bayonet, but it's had its blade cut down to a 10-inch blade. And it fits into this scabbard, which is a plastic scabbard, which was adopted also around 1942. You see the little U.S. Ordnance thing there, and you see the little belt hook for hooking it into your web belt. Okay, now that bayonet was replaced with this one, and actually it's not a real replacement, but if you notice, this was a later made bayonet, and this one is by Union Fork and Hoe, if you can see that. This one does not have a date on it that I can find, but this is also a World War II era bayonet. But if you notice now, the fuller does not run the whole length of the blade, and that means that this blade was made after 1942. So sometime between 1943 and most likely around 1951. They actually stopped making these bayonets because they had so many of them. They didn't really need to make more. They might have still been making them in 52 or 53 because of the Korean War, but they did stop making them, and all of them would be, you cannot tell the difference between the ones made during World War II and the ones made after World War II, basically. And even if they were made after World War II, they would then still be a Korean War era bayonet. And again, this was made for the M1 Garand. Now, and obviously it fits the same sheath. Now, and if you notice here, the other knife did not have it, the other bayonet did not have it. That's because it got knocked off or broken. But this is the bayonet catch that holds it into the scabbard. You push on the little button and it releases. That same button is the button that releases the end of the bayonet, the little catch for the lug on the M1 rifle. This actually operates that as well. So you push that to release it from the rifle. You also push it to release it from the sheath. And among collectors, this will often be referred to as an M1 bayonet, and this one will often be referred to as an M1942 or an M1905/42 bayonet. But according to the Army, these are both M1 bayonets. Once you cut it down, it's just an M1 bayonet. They didn't really sit around futzing about it in the catalog or in the inventory. You could have easily gotten either one of these bayonets at any time during the war, because they had a lot of 16-inch blades that they needed to cut down. So they continued to cut these blades down until they ran out of the blades. Okay, the next knife is actually another reproduction. I guess you could call it a reproduction, even though it's a military specs knife. And the blade on this knife was still being used in U.S. military knives right up into the time that this knife was actually being made. This is definitely a reproduction sheath. This is the M6 sheath for the M3 trench knife. And the reason I'm breaking this out is because this knife is the grandfather of every bayonet that I'm going to be showing in just a little bit. Like I mentioned, this is a reproduction. It is actually made by Ontario. You see the stamping there. It says US M3 Ontario 1943. Now you'll find several knives from World War II that are stamped almost identically like that. The only difference is, instead of saying Ontario, it will say something like Camillus, or it'll say Imperial, or a number of other companies. I can't remember how many companies off the top of my head made this knife, but it's probably around 17 or 18. It was made by quite a few companies, but surprisingly, this knife did not see nearly as much service as you think it did during World War II. It was supposed to be issued to anyone who was receiving an M1 carbine, but numbers were not made in sufficient, or the amount was not made in sufficient numbers, so that every carbine, and everyone who got the M1 carbine would get this knife, especially in the beginning. So what was happening is they would get almost any other kind of hunting knife that the Army managed to procure, because especially the 225 quartermaster knife was a very popular knife that showed up, which was a more appropriate knife actually for most of the soldiers who would be needing a knife. This knife, interesting story about why this particular knife was chosen, partly because the Army wanted a fighting knife, and this definitely fits the role of a fighting knife. It is like a dagger, but it is a heavier blade than what you would find on a dagger, so it is less likely to break. And that is why you also have the spine going halfway up. That is a thick spine, so you've got an 1/8 of an inch steel going here before you get the blade to thin out, and you have a pretty rigid rib going down the middle there. So you've got 1.5 edges. This is the false edge up on top, very sharp, and then you've got the bottom edge, which is about 6.5 inches long. I believe the blade is about 6 3/4 inches long. You see the ribbed handle here. The number of ribs would change from different companies and stuff, so different companies might have fewer ribs on there. I believe Case made one that had actually no ribs on it, and I believe the Case also had a straight guard, but the purpose of the guard is so you can put your thumb there, so when you're stabbing and you have basically indexed where the long cutting edge is. The knife was popular because it looks cool. Um, my dad referred to it as that's the knife that all the officers grabbed and all the paratroopers got. No one else got them. My dad should have received a knife like this because he was a BAR gunner. Typically, you either got a bayonet or you got the M3 trench knife or some other kind of hunting knife in World War II. Now, the other thing I showed was this M6 sheath. This is the original sheath for it. And the idea, you notice you've got the metal staples going across here. That is actually to strengthen this area so you don't cut it and everything. And you notice it's riveted going down the sides and everything for strength. And then you've got the metal plate on there so it doesn't stab you in the leg. That's the way it was actually made. And then you had this long dangler going on here. So it would be hanging off of your belt down your side. And the reason it was doing that is because you had if you had an M1 or an M1, basically this was to get the knife hanging below your belt and away from all the gear strapped onto your belt so that you could get to the knife. The sheath looks cooler, but was not the most practical sheath, especially in the Pacific where the leather rotted very quickly and numerous other problems were with the sheath. So the Army quickly adapted a new sheath for it, and the sheath that came out was very similar to this, but not quite the same. This is the M8A1 scabbard, and you see how it looks and everything. And it is a plastic scabbard. You will find it sometimes with a steel reinforcing toe down here. Sometimes it will not have it. And then you've got the steel throat here, but the body of it is plastic. And this one is the M8A1. You know that because you can slip it onto a belt. The M8 is slightly different. I believe the M8 has the hook, but it doesn't have the belt loop. If not, I'm backwards and it has the belt loop, but it doesn't have the hook. It's one of the two. But they quickly adapted it so that they sewed on the belt hook up here and then the belt loop passing through, and you got the brass snap there. And this became the sheath for the M3 and also the M4 bayonet. And so now M4 bayonet, and if you notice, it looks very similar to the M3 trench knife. The blade geometry is almost identical. Now it changes a little bit over time, and the experts will be able to sit there and say, okay, that one's an earlier one, that's a later one, and so on and so forth. But basically, you've got the spear point blade. It's about an inch thick, and you've got the false edge up here, which covers about half the blade, and then the long edge, cutting edge there, and then the ribs going here. And this would be the way this showed up in World War II with the leather handle still. And the difference is from the M3, if we can look at the two, now you have the ring for the bayonet, so that you can slip it onto the front of the M1 carbine, and instead of just a plain pommel, you now have a catch, a release here, so that you can snap it onto the back of your M1 carbine. And that's really the difference. Now, this was one that was made in the 1990s. And this is made by Camillus, but the marking here, U.S. Camillus, if we can see it there, was typically the way they would be doing this on the M4 bayonets. They would be making the mark here. And M3 trench knives would also end up getting a mark here. Now, these did not start showing up in World War II until around 1944, late in 1944, if I'm correct. And it's because basically the original M1 carbine was issued without a bayonet, and the knife, the carbine did not actually have a bayonet lug. It was something that was requested. People say, hey, we'd like to be able to use this with a bayonet. And so they basically adapted the M3 trench knife into the M4 bayonet. And the reason they gave it the number M4 is because they stopped giving everything the same number, because it was becoming very confusing having an M1 carbine, an M1 bayonet, an M1 Garand rifle. Everything was M1, so this became an M4, and it's carrying over from the M3 trench knife, so you won't confuse this with the trench knife either. Like I said, this one was made in the 1990s. It was made for commercial use, and it basically, when a lot of M1 carbines started showing up on the commercial market, Camillus hopped on the bandwagon and started making M1 bayonet or M4 carbine bayonets for the carbine rifles that were suddenly flooding the civilian market because people wanted their carbine to have a bayonet. And the way you can tell that is different is basically the way this looks here. Camillus made three different runs of this knife. This is the one from the 90s. The ones from World War II have like a smash on here at the back, and then they made another run of them, a short run of them, during the Korean War, and it also has that strange mark on there. If I have some pictures of it, I'll try and show it to you, but I don't remember. But if you see it looking like that, it is definitely from the 1990s. So if somebody, and also it comes with a leather sheath, but it's easy to find an M8A1 sheath for these knives. And by the way, the M8A1 sheath came out very quickly after the M8, so I believe it might have actually made it into service in time for World War II. But you can see here, bayonet goes in, fits perfectly. The M3 trench knife will also fit in it. And one of the good things about it is it doesn't matter which way you insert it, it will go in. Now, a lot of people think that the sheath sharpens the knife. It does not. It's just a metal throat. It's just protecting it. There is nothing in here that sharpens the knife. The Army tells you not to sharpen your bayonet because they don't want you to sharpen the bayonet. It's just that simple. In any case, M4 bayonet for the M1 carbine. This was a very popular bayonet, and the Army also saw it as a relatively less expensive bayonet to make than this bayonet, especially when they started making it with a plastic handle. And they started making it with a plastic handle during World War II for the same reason they went to the plastic scabbard. The plastic scabbard did not rot in the jungle, so they switched over to a plastic handle for these knives. And, well, you see the difference in size. This is much heavier, much bulkier. It gets in the way of more things than this knife. And it's also less expensive to make than this knife. And these knives were, especially around the time of the Korean War, the Army was looking at, like, we kind of need to replace this bayonet. We're running out of them. They're kind of old. They're old-fashioned. We don't need them as much. You know, we are fighting this war in Korea, but do we really want to start buying more of these when we should be looking at getting something a little more modern? And so what they decided was, let's adapt the M4 bayonet for the M1 Garand rifle. And that led to the M5 bayonet. Now, if you look there, looks very similar to the M4 bayonet, except it's got an interesting crossguard here. And that is one of the more interesting things about the M5 bayonet is the little plug here. So instead of having a ring that goes around the barrel on the M1, like you have on this bayonet, see how you got the ring there? They have this that actually just sticks into the plug on the gas port. So this is right under the barrel. You've got the little plug for the gas port on the M1 rifle, and that goes right into there, and then you slide it right in. And they gave it a nice little clip here, a much bigger button than what you have on this one, which was a complaint that soldiers had about it. It was very hard to push that button down to release the the bayonet, so they gave it a larger plug. You know, a larger clasp there, and that became the M5 or M5-1 bayonet, also the M5A1 bayonet. Now, a lot of people will say that this was used in the Korean War, and that's not true. It just missed the Korean War. It was adopted right after the Korean War, and it only served until about 1959. And it actually served alongside of these knives because the M1 stayed in service for quite some time, and you had the chance of having either one of these knives issued with your M1 bayonet or M1 rifle. Either the M5, this is an M5-1, or you could end up with an M1 bayonet. It really depended on where you're at and what service you got. This one was my father-in-law's. He was stationed in Hawaii. I got it in 1957 or 58, somewhere around there. M5-1 bayonet. This one, oh, not this one. You'd think this one, but no. Where is it at? That's what happens when you got a bunch of bayonets laying around. Here we go. This one here, the Union cutlery one that predates 1942, that has these the fuller going all the way through the blade. This one was given to me by a friend of mine, and this was the bayonet that he was issued when he was serving in the Army in 1961. So a World War II veteran bayonet that was issued to him in 1961. So the Army did not just say, oh, we got a new bayonet, and they got rid of all the old ones. And obviously 1961, this is after the M14 rifle had been adopted, but not every unit in the United States Army was already using the M14. So 1961, still getting issued an M1, and this was the bayonet he was issued, an old World War II relic. The rifle he was getting may have also been an old World War II relic. But speaking of that, you have the M14 being adopted, what was it, I think 1959, and with the M14 came a new bayonet, and if you notice, our old friend, the blade from the M3 bayonet is still there. So the Army really settled on a blade that they liked, and part of it was because it was just very cost efficient, and it was very easy to say, all right, adapt this bayonet for the M14, and then someone will go out there and do that. And in this case, do I see who's making this one? US Milpar. So this is by Milpar. The other one was JD Tools, I think, the M5, but this is by Milpar. They made a lot of stuff for the Army, and a lot of it looks very much like the one for the M1 rifle. You got to remember, if you look closely at the M1 rifle or M14, you see a lot of M1 in the M14. They really just updated it. You still got the larger clap here, or larger button here to release the lug or release the catch for the lug, the bayonet lug. But you have a large circle here for the M14 barrel. A M6 bayonet for the M14 is a very short-lived rifle because the M16 came around very quickly. I believe that was adopted in 62, 61, 62, 63, somewhere around there. And with that, we move on to the next bayonet almost immediately. But here was the M6 bayonet, and we move into the M7 bayonet, and here we go. M7 bayonet, big old ring in the front here, and where is it at? Do not puncture my leg. Got way too many sharp things over there. M1 carbine bayonet. The back clasp, they've gone back to the release that was being used on the M1 carbine for the M16 bayonet. So they said, why reinvent the wheel? They went all the way back to a design from World War II. So this design here for the catch on the back, the ring in the front, and the blade are all traced back to the M4 carbine bayonet in World War II. And this handle, the black handle here, is the way the handle on the M4 carbine bayonet was also designed. So with the palm swell in the middle and everything else. So when you grab an M7 bayonet and you hold it in your hand, you kind of know exactly the way a soldier in World War II, at the end of World War II, would have felt when he was holding his M4 carbine bayonet. That's how much it changed. This one is by BOC. Yeah, BOC, that's a Bauer Ordnance Ord Company, I think. But very much not the cousin to, but the what? The great. Let's try and let's think of it this way. This is the great grandfather of all the U.S. military bayonets, and this would be the great grandfather of all the bayonets. So this is first the M3, and then you work into the M4, the M5, the M6, and finally the M7. Now today the Marines use what's the number on that? It's like OK or OT something 3, and the I'll have it show up right down here. You know, that's what the Marines use. The Army uses the M9 bayonet, or I should say the Army uses the M9 bayonet for frontline forces. The Army still uses the M7 bayonet on some, depending on who you are in the Army, you might also still be issued an M7 bayonet. And from what I understand, the Air Force and the Navy still use the M7 bayonet with their M16 rifles or M4 carbines. Now, that information is a couple years old. They may have moved on, but from what I understand, which one? This bayonet is still in use, and it is a direct descendant of this, the M3 trench knife. So I thought you'd enjoy that, but remember also, today is Veterans Day, November 11th, 11 a.m. That's why this video launched November 11th at 11 a.m. because it's Veterans Day, and it's somebody that you really need to think about, or some people that you really need to think about. I'm not saying that simply because I'm a veteran. I'm saying that simply because 22 a day is too high. 22 veterans a day committing suicide is way too high. And the fact that it's over 22 a day makes it even more important that we keep the veterans of this great country in our hearts, in our minds, and in our prayers. All right, with that said, I'll let you go. I know it's a long one. Hope you enjoyed it. And celebrate Veterans Day by thanking a veteran.
Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with Tobias. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.